welcome to Comics Chat. I'm Sarah Cook. I'm a comics writer, and this is a show where I talk with comics creators and fans about their favorite comics and why they love them. If you'd like to follow me elsewhere, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Sarah C. Comics, and you can subscribe to my newsletter, and the link to that is in the show notes. If you enjoy this show, like and subscribe. Today's interview is with Raymond Griffith. He's an exciting creator with a comic called Astounding Tales that's live on Kickstarter right now. It's a Golden Age style comic about a young girl who finds out she's secretly an android and uses her powers to fight villains. It's very cool. They just reached their funding goal and they're working towards some exciting stretch goals, so definitely head on over and check that out. The link to that is in the show notes as well. And Raymond and I talked about Bone by Jeff Smith. And Bone is one of the comics that I've really enjoyed for a long time. And I think it was one of those kind of foundational comics for Raymond, which is one of the reasons why I enjoyed this chat so much. I really love talking with people about the comics that kind of influenced them the most and really had the kind of the greatest impact. And one of the things that he talks about that Raymond mentions is how the art style is almost Disney-like in a lot of ways. And there's so much action going on all the time, and it's this fast-paced story. But there's also a lot going on that's really complex and really nuanced, kind of beneath the surface. And it's this kind of marriage of this really beautiful cartoon style with this really kind of nuanced character building. And I just really enjoyed hearing Raymond's thoughts about that. It was a great conversation. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Hi, welcome to Comics Chat. I'm Sarah Cook. I'm here with artist Raymond Griffith. Hi. Raymond just launched a Kickstarter for a comic called Astounding Tales. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? It sounds exciting.
Oh, yeah. It is exciting. And Astounding Tales, like it kind of sounds, is sort of a nostalgic return to the way comics used to be. Obviously, it's a play on Action Comics. Astounding Tales, you get the comparison there. It's a classic superhero adventure, but we also modernize it a little bit. We have, for example, a main character who's a young girl instead of just, a big, strong guy. She discovers she's secretly an android and then proceeds to fight monsters, kick bad guys' butt, and basically have a great time.
That sounds awesome. And I love the kind of that it's kind of like the Golden Age style. I have this I don't know, one of my creative goals at some point is to do an old style like horror, like Marvel horror comic type something. Just because I love that old style, but doing that but doing it in a more contemporary way with this young girl who's your protagonist sounds very cool.
Yeah, it's fun trying to adapt pulp to modern day standards while keeping that spirit still there.
Yeah, for sure. Even just the writing style, like trying to match the writing style, because it's not just the art style, how it looks, it's how the story's paced and how the pages are paced. It's
a
a
lot
lot to
quicker.
think about. It's a lot quicker.
And that's all thanks to the writer of the series and actually the creator, Jake Cohen. He is just enmeshed in that world. I'm actually coming from a place of more modern references, whereas for him, he can give you issue, he can give you panel sometimes, 30 years back of comics, 40, 50 years, just everything. He knows everything. And
Wow.
I'm always learning something new when I talk to him.
That's impressive. Yeah, I've thought about what it would be like to write a comic in that kind of older style, and it would be hard because I'm more I've read some of the old stuff, but what I read mostly now is more the modern stuff, and it would be you'd have to like flip a switch in your brain to to kind of get to that headspace.
And that's the challenge, I think, is not just, trying to write in that style, but still keep it interesting for a modern audience.
Yeah, for
because,
sure.
Standards have changed. The way people read these things have changed. They're on their phones now. They scroll one panel at a time.
Yeah. And what's it been like for you as an artist to adapt your style?
It's been really interesting because I didn't draw like this when we started this project. It was 3 years ago when I got in contact with Jake for the first time. He wanted a very specific style, a very specific look, and I had to spend a month just looking at reference to figure out how to
Wow.
draw anywhere close to this because what I was drawing, it was inspired by what we're going to talk about today. Much more modern, much more Disney style cartooning, and so I had to really adapt what I was doing. But I think it worked well because it created kind of a fusion. So it enabled that growth into a modern style while still retaining some of that classic detailing, the textures, the way they made water and trees, the depth of the shadows. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, if you're ready, do you want to jump on into the comic you wanted to chat about today?
I am always ready to talk about this comic any day, any night. Just tell me when. And I actually I brought props, so
Nice.
I can prove the bona
Awesome.
fides. I can't get it to focus though. I may have to unblur. But yes, I would like to discuss. Come on, focus on this. Here, there we go. All right, it's Bone. This is
It is a
one of
great
my favorite
comic.
comics of all time, and obviously this is a tribute edition. I have 4 or 5 different editions to prove, my bona fides of being a huge fan of this
Wow,
series.
very cool. What is it that I guess sort of initially grabbed you about it?
Well, the thing about Bone is that it is the perfect comic, and possibly the best comic ever written. But to be more specific, it is a delightful adventure that starts off immediately throwing you into the world with humor, uh, memorable characters that from page one you understand who they are, what motivates them,
Yeah.
how they're going to react to things, but will still surprise you with what they say. It's extremely reminiscent of the artistic styles of like Disney and Pogo because that's who inspired the
Mhm.
the creator Jeff Smith. But he takes those things and puts them into this more serious fantasy world. It's not quite Game of Thrones level, but it's
Mhm.
serious. It's high stakes. The world is ending at one point,
Yeah.
but then you have these characters in front of it that are ripped straight out of a Disney cartoon, and you wouldn't think that contrast would work, but it really, really works. And you combine that with the fact that it's an 1,000-page epic,
Yeah.
this thick, completely solid the entire way through. Not a dull moment to be had in the entire book. It's hard not to see why it's my favorite.
Yeah. For sure. I think you're right. I think that's what's so like charming about it, that it feels like I kind of think of it as almost like Rescue Rangers meets Lord of the Rings or something. That you have the
That is
kind of
an excellent comparison.
it is this like very high stakes fantasy world. Um, but you also have these characters who are like making friends with bugs and like constantly kind of poking fun at each other. And the contrast between that, it works really well. And you wouldn't necessarily think that, that would work, but it does. And and you're right from the beginning, like you're just thrown, there's so much action, but it's not, I think there are a lot of comics where it's just action, action, or not a lot, but some, where it is kind of just action, action, action. Um, and it maybe feels like a little bit too much or a little bit too fast paced, and you might feel like you kind of would wish that things would slow down a little bit. But Bone doesn't feel that way, even though there is so much action and it's so fast paced. I think the characters are so compelling and their kind of interactions with each other. And the growth that they're kind of forced to go through is a result of like going on this saga. Um, Makes it feel like there's, deeper stuff going on underneath the surface, even though it's so fast paced.
It's very true. I was going to say, I think the strength of the characters really may be the root of the entire thing because there's
Mhm.
never a time, there's never a moment where you're confused about what is motivating or making these characters do what they do. Not that they're simple, but they are
Yeah.
complex in a way that is completely understandable.
Yeah. And you see it, it kind of, it's like, I think they're kind of like their foibles come back to hit them like over and over. Um, like even just in the first issue, there was one scene as I was kind of rereading some of it where Phone Bone is like he's lost in this cavern and he's trying to climb up this mountain, but he climbs up the wrong side of it, and he's kind of complaining about how like Funny Bone is always asking him to save him and to help him and stuff, and he's like, I should just like whatever. Why is he always asking me for help? And then he realizes he's lost, and he's like, he needs to ask Funny Bone for help. And it's just like the humor of that, the humor of it, but also like how I don't know, it's like really insightful humor, and it kind of points the finger back at each of them. Like they have these kind of ideas of themselves, and they can have a little bit of like hubris at times, but then that's always just kind of immediately turned back on them. Like even the very first page, Phony Bone is talking about how he's this like beloved character in Boneville, and everyone loves him, and how could they throw him out because everyone loves him? And they're like, well, they threw you out because you were like greedy and you had these like corrupt business deals. Just right, turns it right around on him.
Exactly.
And
No,
it's
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 very true.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It's just it's interesting because it's like you were saying, it's complex, but it's like simple but complex at the same time. There's more kind of going on under the surface. Like I work at a library, and we have some bone in the children's section, but then we have some bone in the teen section, and more with the adult comics. And I think it kind of spans that gamut. Like there is some of it that's, fun and sillier, and a little bit lighter, but then it really gets more complex and kind of deeper and a little bit darker as it goes, but it manages to kind of hold on to all of it, and make it all work well.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. That is exactly what I was going to say. Is there's a progression to it. You start out with
Yeah.
a very simple, silly adventure where they're lost in the desert. We got to find our way out. Oh, why are we lost in the desert? Phony Bone's a jerk. He made the townsfolk mad at him.
Yeah.
But there's a clue, and I don't want to spoil the book, but like 3 pages in, something happens, and it's not really focused on. It's just something that happened. It's a little odd, but that's a clue for the deep story that was planned, 500, 600 pages later that comes in. And you can tell immediately that it is once you get to that section. You're like, oh, he knew what he was doing immediately. There was no floundering here. We've planned this thing to the letter, it seemed anyway.
Yeah.
And that's another hallmark of the skill and talent that Jeff Smith has, with the fact that he was able to look so far ahead and know where he wanted to go from,
Yeah.
again, this is a 1,000-page book. I want to say it was 10 years of production, something like that.
Yeah, it's to have that like that level of foresight and to be able to see how all these pieces are gonna fit together, um and advance like that for something so epic is impressive.
Mm-hmm. For sure, for sure.
um so you mentioned earlier that it is one of the comics that influenced you as an artist. How did it influence you?
I would say it was the comic that influenced me as an artist, because before I read it, I didn't want to make comics. I was an
Wow.
artist. I've been drawing since, before I could remember. My formative memory is not getting allowed into the art club at third grade, because I
Oh,
didn't draw good enough. And I told them
oh,
I was going to prove them wrong.
that's awesome.
And I stuck to that. But before that, I never imagined doing comics or anything like that. Maybe animation, but certainly
Mhm.
never anything with comics. I was handed the book at 16. I had a job as a caricature artist at a theme park, and one of
Oh
my
wow.
coworkers was like, "Hey, you should read this." I read it, and I was like, "Oh, well, this is what I want to do. I figured it out. Solved."
This is the answer.
And I certainly enjoy Marvel and DC, and I've certainly been inspired by some of that artwork. There's certainly some anime in what I've done. I watched Dragon Ball Z as a kid. Everyone did, but the way the shadows are used, the thick and thins of the line work. I wish I had a nice copy of the black and white to show you. I have my black and white edition over here, but it's shredded and it's also signed, so I have to be a little delicate with it. So I'm not going to page through it too much, but it's just the way he can use 3 lines and imply a forest. that's what
Hmm.
blew me away, and that's what I strive to do in my artwork, is to achieve that economy of line, the as little as you can to imply as much as you can.
Yeah, that's super interesting. um, yeah, even just from a writing perspective, that's really interesting because I think about when I'm describing a panel and all of the things that, sometimes need to be in a panel for the narrative to make sense. And when I'll worry sometimes about like, is this too crowded? Like, if there's like I don't know, some small little thing that the reader is going to need to see. Is it going to stand out enough? Is the panel like too busy? But if you can have that economy and just imply some things and imply enough for the reader to understand, then some of the things that you need to emphasize can stand out more and shine more. And that's super interesting.
The more I do this and the more comics I make, the more I realize that the whole entire endeavor is about showing as little as you can to imply as much as you can in the writing, in the artwork. One little quick brief panel that they're going to spend 2 seconds on, you cannot make it, the Sistine Chapel. It's got to be there, and the next thing, and the next thing.
Yeah, that is 1,000% true. And I think that's something that I'm learning more and more with my writing. Um, I think kind of like well, it's still now, but more so when I kind of just first started writing comics, I would worry that I wasn't, if I didn't like kind of spell things out to a certain extent, that I wouldn't be getting my message across, and then I would overwrite. And it's so much of it is like, you have to trust the reader. Like the reader is intelligent, they'll understand. So say as little kind of as you can and still get the message across, and that's going to be a more fulfilling reading experience for the reader. But it's not easy. It's the easy thing is to over explain, to show too much.
Sorry, I'm just trying not to talk over you too much. I know
Oh,
we had
no
just a
worries.
just a second of delay, but I agree with
Yeah,
everything you
there's a
just
little
said
bit of a
there.
delay, but but
um,
yeah, I used to write a lot of poetry, and it was really the case in poetry that you had to be like economical with your words. And I try to remember that when I'm writing comics to kind of get back into that headspace and pull back when necessary.
it's an ongoing process.
It is for sure.
The
So do you prefer the color or the black and white?
black and white all day,
Hmm.
every day.
Yeah,
Line art
I
is my
think I
one
agree.
true love, for sure. I mentioned I did caricatures for a living, and that was always the most important part, was getting those lines on the page to look right. And that's why my I have to show this off, my damaged and destroyed volume that I've had since I was 16. That's why this is the one I still had to get signed by Mr. Jeff Smith. So
Ah, that's
yeah,
awesome.
I'm very proud of that. I had to show it off. When I showed him this book, he was like, "This book is returning to the earth."
That's really funny. Yeah, I think I agree with Bone. I prefer the black and white. And it's interesting. I haven't written the comics that I've written have all had color. But I really want to try writing something for black and white because I think it would change just how I envision my panels, even how I write my panels. I haven't done it yet, but it is a goal.
It would be a fun exercise. I highly recommend it.
So yeah, was there anything else about Bone that really stood out for you, or any parts of it that are particularly memorable?
Yeah, I actually brought, and like I said, I have the color copies, but I brought the book with the scene that changed everything for me. Because when I first started reading it, I was like, yeah, this is cool. I like this a lot. And then we get to a sequence, and let's see if I can get to the right sequence, where they have run away. Bone has run away, and they're sort of running in the rain. And this video is not good quality. This is not doing justice to it. But we head out in the dark. We meet Grandma, and like there's a moment where they have to be quiet for a second, and then all of a sudden there's rats around them, and and it turns into this exciting, or rat creatures rather, I should say, to be clear for anyone who hasn't read the book. They are not little creatures. They are giant humanoid beasts that want to put you into a quiche. But you know, it turns into this incredible sequence, and it just it changed everything because it was like, wow, there's no vocals here. There's just pure visual storytelling. This suddenly went up a tier.
Wow.
And it
That's
just keeps going
awesome.
from there.
Yeah, I love it when you have those moments when you're reading a comic and there's just like the way that something's done that just like changes your brain and you're like, wow, this is super smart. Or and it really, I think, informs, your own art after that in like a whole new way. Changes the way that you do your own art.
Oh yeah, and that's one
Good.
of those scenes where if you actually look at what's being done on the panel, you're like, oh, there's three white shapes on this panel, but there's so much fear and suspense and tension in it. How is this possible?
Yeah. Wow. That's super impressive. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Spent a long time studying this, unfortunately. Too long.
Yeah.
Embarrassingly long.
I know. Same. I feel like I spend embarrassing amounts of time thinking about comics. But can
Yeah.
you really think about comics too much?
Well, are you asking me or my wife? Because there's two answers.
Depends on who you ask, I suppose. um, well, yeah, was there anything else that you wanted to mention, wanted to chat about?
Well, like I said, we're just very excited to be launching again. It's been 2 years since I've been on Kickstarter, and the reason why is pretty not fun. Basically, I lost my entire business due to, that little COVID thing. You might
Oh
remember
no.
that. And it kind of got me down a little bit. I got a little down,
Oh,
and I didn't draw for like a year. But
oh wow.
we're back into it. I'm happy. I'm excited. I'm excited to be talking about Bone because, like I said, it's inspired everything I've done. And it's embarrassing how much of it is core to my character. When I met Jeff Smith, I was shaking. I was physically shaking. I could not stop myself. And it was very embarrassing, but I'm still really glad I did it.
I know. I feel that way about like certain comics too. If I ever met these people, I would just be same shaking and at a loss for
uh,
words.
I'm curious who would leave you with the shakes the most? Is there a person?
I think the first person would be Neil Gaiman. Because it was
That's a good
Sandman.
one.
Yeah.
That is a
Sandman
good
was
one.
the one that made me, I think, want to write comics. Like I'd been a writer, before, but Sandman was the one where like coming back to it and kind of reading it through the second time, I think especially, was like I was
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, this is what I want to write. Well, yeah, this has been a great chat.
Oh yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I'm happy to talk about Bone anytime. It's been a real pleasure, and I just hope we get to do it again sometime.